Good morning, everybody. How do you get across the ocean? Well, now we fly, but for years it was ocean liners. And it was on this date in 1967, September 20, that the Queen Elizabeth II was launched, signaling the end of an era. When people like Samuel Champlain crossed the Atlantic in a ship like this, it took about 5 months one way. And by the time we get to our cruise ship story, they had it down to about 5 days. And one reason the liners were so successful is the invention of the big steam engine and the ability of these big ships to store so much coal. So here's a photo of one of the liners' keel being laid in a big shipyard. So this is really big industry with a lot of tech and a lot of cool designs for big ships. Many of the ocean liners carried immigrants. You think about all the immigrants that came to our country in the middle to late 1800s, and they're using these ocean liners. There were many famous ocean liner companies. One of them was White Star. This is the company of the Titanic. Another one was Cunard. And they competed partly for this, the Blue Riband, which was a kind of an unofficial ribbon for who could cross the Atlantic the fastest. So this was a prestige thing for the steamship companies. Here's perhaps the first superliner. This is the Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse. Looks a lot like the Titanic, doesn't it? And this came about late 1800s when the great navies are building their big ships too. So most of the luxury liners had 3 classes: first class, second class, third class. Here's a first class part of the ship, and if you're in first class you might even go swimming. Here's the swimming pool on Olympic, which is Titanic's sister. And the classes didn't mix, so you wouldn't see third class hanging out with the first class people. Here's third class room, so bunk beds, 4 people, not a lot of privacy. The voyages took about a week, so people could hang in there for 7 days. So in 1909 the Republic and the Florida collided off the coast of Nantucket, but because they had primitive radio, there was a very successful rescue. And 3 years later, when Titanic goes down, radio will be part of that story. When World War I came, many of the ocean liners were converted into troop ships. So here's Olympic with its war paint on. And you may recall that this steamship, the Lusitania, was sunk by a German U-boat during World War I. We were not in the war yet, and there were Americans on board. And the sinking of the Lusitania was one of the reasons we entered World War I. But it did have war material on it, and the Germans knew that. So if you've been to New York City, you might recall along the west side there are all those empty piers. Well, this is a photograph of when the piers were filled with ocean liners. But eventually they all succumbed to competition from airplanes. Here's the 707, one of the great airplanes after World War II, many others like it. And even though the steamships got faster, so here's the SS United States, which has the record for going across the Atlantic in 3 days and change. It just wasn't enough to save the industry. Airplanes were just too fast. This ship, by the way, is off the coast of Virginia, just kind of rusting away, I think. Well, here's our event. On September 20 in 1967, the QE2 was launched, which is kind of ironic because the industry was really on its last legs even by the late 1950s. So here's the inside of the QE2. Very luxurious, and for lots of people, the 3 to 4 days across the Atlantic is fun on this kind of setting, but airplanes just carry too many people. And now we have cruise ships. And there's a big difference between cruise ships and ocean liners. They ride higher in the water. They're not really built for rough weather. They're not as fast. They don't really carry cargo. But this is where most people go now when they go on the ocean. And here's our ship today, the QE2. It's down in Dubai. It's a floating hotel. So not quite the use its planners foresaw.